Welcome to the Ketogeek Podcast. Let's do this.
Health, nutrition, fitness, low-carb lifestyle.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Ketogeek Podcast. Today is a very special day because we're celebrating our first year anniversary at Ketogeek since we launched our business, started our product, and our podcast. So just to give you guys a little bit of a heads up, if you're expecting this episode to be filled with lots of science and adventure, then you might want to come back next week where we will have Gary Fettke on our show and we'll talk about some interesting and cool stuff. But today is just going to be all about Ketogeek and we're going to trade some war stories. Corey's on board here with me. Corey, how goes it? Happy evening.
It is going really well. I had a full day of work today and here I am at Ketogeek.
We have some special wine that was given to us by our customers, and we're celebrating this moment with that wine in our hands. So if you've been through this entire journey with us at Ketogeek, then we really thank you for being with us, and we have some new updates that we want to share. We've got a lot of new cool stuff coming up, and we've learned so many different new things ever since we started Ketogeek, and our journey has just, our thinking has just changed, and we can go from where we began, review everything, and then we can come back to where we are at the moment, and then we can explain to people what's next for Ketogeek as well. So Corey, you know what we should do? People have heard my story a million times now on how I got into keto and the Ketogeek stuff, and they can go to the first episode of Ketogeek to check that out. But what about you, man? How did your journey get into the whole keto lifestyle?
It was more or less by proxy, by being in proximity with people who were doing keto. I initially learned about keto at the Ashtanga Yoga Napa Valley studio I practiced at, and Fahad here preached keto. Another gentleman, Dorian Greenow, preached keto, and I thought it was kind of silly at first. But then again, I flipped on my science brain. I was like, you know what? I've been experimenting with diet and nutrition ever since the age of 18. So let's put this into my my belt here. Why not? Let's try keto. And it took a couple months from learning about keto to actually starting keto. And at the time, I was vegetarian. So I was like, oh, you have to eat lots of meat to be on keto. And I found forums on Reddit specifically, are vegetarian keto, and I started following those guys and looking into what they did, and I was like, oh, this is possible, let's do it. So started off with lots of eggs, lots of yogurts, and leafy greens here and there, veggies, and it was feeling really good, I'd have to admit. First 3 days was like brain fog. I told my family I'm no longer consuming so many carbs. They thought I was crazy and I was going to die, but I'm clearly alive. Anywho, the keto diet started to not work out for me on vegetarian after a month. It just seems like my energy levels would plateau and then slowly creep down right in the middle of the day.
Just to kind of interject a little bit. So you were doing yoga at that point.
I was.
How did you notice? Was there any performance change in your yoga practice? Because I used to do Ashtanga Yoga with you. You were practically my teacher at one point.
Yeah.
You still are, technically speaking. At least when it comes to production as well, you're still my teacher. So when you were doing the whole Ashtanga Yoga, what happened? As in, did your performance go up, or did your stamina go up? Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah. So the main difference I noticed was just a sustained energy through practice. And I noticed that when I did practice with just regular vegetarian and eating higher carbs, there would be really strong points and bursts of energy in my practice. And I had to kind of learn how to distribute that energy over the course of my hour and a half to 2 hour practice. It's pretty long. For those of you who have practiced Ashtanga, you may know.
Let's explain to them real quick, what is it?
Okay, so Ashtanga Yoga and a cookie, right?
Just the simplest version ever.
Ashtanga Yoga follows a sequence of poses, otherwise known as asanas, and you start with primary series. Everyone starts with sun salutations, and you learn how to breathe and move at the same time, so you're connecting your breath, and that's the basis of the practice. And as you learn Ashtanga Yoga, you learn one pose at a time, kind of like how a dojo would teach you karate. One move at a time, one punch, one kick at a time, until you've mastered that. And then they move you on to the next pose. There's about 30 some odd poses that you perform in Ashtanga. It's pretty rigorous. You do a lot of things called jump backs and jump throughs between each floor pose. So you can work up a serious sweat, as you may know. You practiced in a Batman costume one time.
And Kylo Ren. Yes. I think it was like last October I dressed up in Kylo Ren, and there was everybody else was in their normal yoga attire. And happy Halloween to everybody. Here comes Kylo Ren. See, that brings me to this sort of like sidetracking here, but I think that brings you into an interesting point, which is you should always, at least based on my opinion, you should always try things that are a bit uncomfortable for you, because that really pushes you outside of the comfort. By the way, I think that's part of the practice as is, isn't it?
It really is.
Not exactly wearing the Kylo Ren costume, though.
Yeah. More or less, you're wearing nothing but booty shorts.
Okay, all right. So let's go back to the Ashtanga Yoga. Yeah. So please continue.
Absolutely. So I'll pick up where I left off. You get the basis now. So it's a moving and breathing system it's based in asana, so you're doing poses. Ashtanga delves way deeper than that, but that's not for this podcast. There's 8 aspects to Ashtanga Yoga. We'll talk about those if you really want to later. But as far as performance goes, I've noticed on keto that the energy levels were sustained throughout practice, and I've noticed also recovery time was great as well. You're doing extremely intense stretching, and you're also doing isometric contractions of your muscles, so you're trying to lengthen and contract your muscles at the same time in Ashtanga just to keep the balance there. But that's what I've noticed, and also gains happened here as well as soon as I got on the keto diet. Building an upper back, building an upper chest, arms, it all came once I've upped the protein. So that's pretty much it for the Ashtanga journey. And then a couple months later, ventured away from vegetarianism.
We need to drop here something that happened. Something changed. Something different happened.
What the heck happened?
We were on Twitter one day.
Oh boy.
We remember a beast-like maniac doing, what was it, full 125-pound one-arm snatch?
It was, I think, 160 to respect Sean Baker.
All right, you just name drop. I was going to give them an epic drum roll sort of name drop. Just, you know how you have a cliffhanger and then you name drop? You just name dropped it right away. So, yes, we saw Sean Baker just doing that stuff. And before that, we had Professor Tim Noakes, and he says this one beautiful line: if you see a paradox, always explore it. And you have to realize the greatest scientific breakthroughs in human history have happened through exploring paradoxes, such as Einstein, Newton, with gravity, for example, Galileo, by throwing stuff from the top of a tower. So all of these things were just paradoxes. And we saw Sean Baker, a guy who's just eating meat and water, and he's doing these crazy exercises. We had to go down this rabbit hole and figure out what was going on. And that brought us to the carnivore diet.
Yes.
And so now we can go back to your story. What happened next?
So let's go back to where I was kind of losing energy on vegetarian keto. One, I was getting kind of tired of eating like straight yogurt and eggs every single day and having to do it a lot. And I also noticed as I was going about, at first my food requirements weren't huge, but as I went a month in, I had to eat greater amounts of that stuff. And my body, personally, anecdotally, doesn't do too well with tons of dairy. It ends up going into my sinuses and blocking everything up. I don't know why. But anyway, I said, you know what? Let's put some chicken in there and see what happens. And I ate a chicken salad, and I was like, okay, I didn't die. It sounds like meat's a good deal. And I thought after being vegetarian for so long that my body would have a hard time taking care of the meat. But no, it just went straight back to work, which was pretty cool. And then once we kind of started looking into the paradox of Mr. Baker, Dr. Baker, I was like, okay, let's add some beef in there and see what happens. And we went to In-N-Out promptly after learning about this guy. And I ate beef for the first time in about 2 years. And I felt incredible.
Oh, yeah. We remember, we literally started calling In-N-Out our Ketogeek headquarters.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And speaking of Ketogeek, there was this point in your life where we must fill in the blank here. You joined Ketogeek. You were not part of it at one point. What happened there?
When I joined Ketogeek? Yeah, so I when Fahad was going to the studio on Sundays, we'd all gather together after class and kind of chat and have a good time, drink some tea and coffee together. And he would always bring by the latest and greatest from Ketogeek. And at first we were like just the test rabbits for all these things that he was bringing us. Like the keto, he started off initially with some chocolate bark, and it was pretty good. But I just couldn't work out in my head. I'm like, how much of this stuff do I have to eat on keto? But then he started bringing in the pods, and I was really interested in those. And I asked him, what's one of the main ingredients? He's like, ghee and nuts. I was like, oh, ghee. I've been making that for years. Where do you get your ghee? Get it from Texas. I'm doing Fahad's voice there. No. Pretty awful. I'm like, oh, so you source ghee from Texas. Interesting. I know how to make ghee. Are you interested in me helping you out? And that's kind of where it began. I started bringing ghee into the production, and once we did that, we put fresh ghee into the pod, and that just changed our lives completely.
And do you remember the process when we made the ghee? That was like a whole new, like, opening up this whole Pandora's box of science and culture and tradition, and just talking to anybody we could find. And so I think what we did is we grabbed all the best butters that we could find practically everywhere. We took out the whole stock from Whole Foods. I remember that.
So we went to Whole Foods and we looked at the butter case, and where do we start? How about one of each? So we just grabbed one of each butter, including goat butter. We tried everything.
Buffalo too. I remember we tried buffalo butter too.
Buffalo butter, yeah. That was really interesting stuff. And the top contenders, there was 3. There was Kerrygold, Strauss, and Humboldt Creamery. And we decided that Strauss had to stay.
Yeah, it was a long grinding process. We had to really figure out which one to pick. And then we also started looking up into scientific literature on how heat would affect the entire process of making ghee. So one of the things that we did when we were making the ghee was we went out there and started looking at all the scientific literature that we could find. And the problem with a lot of science that was on food and nutrition and ghee as well was that it's a lot of associative studies, meaning that there was just correlations that literally made no sense. There was no cause and effect going on with a lot of these studies. Like, for example, if you increase the temperature up to, let's say, just a hypothetical, 140 degrees Celsius or something, then the chances of cancer developing are blah, blah, blah. So that was a really weak link. So these were the kind of studies that we were coming up with, and it didn't really make sense. So I had to go back and listen, and I read a few books on how food processing and not biochemistry, but the chemistry of food. And so it wasn't that big of an issue, but eventually we came up to this unique process of very slow cooking. And another problem with the ghee in general was that a lot of ghee that's still in the market at the moment is very, very dark. It's very brutalized and discolored, and it feels really overcooked. It tastes more like brown butter. So people who are wondering what brown butter is, so you basically take the ghee and just overcook, or take butter and overcook the hell out of it, and it turns into this dark brown sort of color, and then if you cool it down, it turns into brown butter. So that can be still used, maybe just with popcorns. We don't need popcorns.
It's I know from my background in cooking, brown butter is popularly used in Italian dishes for a really quick sauce, and it's tasty. It's good.
Okay, so in that case, in a savory dish, I would imagine it would be all right. But we were using it for our pods, and that's another thing, is that for when we were looking at different kinds of ghees for putting inside our pods, we couldn't find good ones. And some of the known brands, including our fellow one friend in common we are not going to name drop here, but most of the ghees were just absolutely garbage. And we just couldn't find that taste, that aroma, the softness, the caramelized flavor that we could get. And we were like, okay, screw this. We're making our own.
The texture.
Oh yeah, the texture.
Very important.
Texture is really important. But we also found out that there's various ways to manipulate the texture as well. For example, sometimes it can turn out grainy, sometimes it can turn out melty, and there's different ways. But I think quick cooling creates that nice sort of smooth texture, and then you can leave it on your shelf, and it maintains that integrity, right?
Yeah, so I actually did a little bit of homework on that and why it happens, the grainy texture. Apparently, fat has, I believe, 6 crystallization phases, and I think we're shooting for crystallization phase 5, which gives us that really smooth paste-like texture that we get. And that seems to happen when you start with really hot ghee, and as you're finishing it, you throw it right into the refrigerator. And then at the very bottom of your vessel, it starts to crystallize and move its way up to the very top. And once it's done, you bring it back to room temperature, and then you have this wonderfully smooth texture. But I've also noticed that fat phase 5 will not happen if you just start with hot and then let it sit at room temperature and cool down that way. You end up with something a little bit more grainy. I forget which crystal phase that is, but we can look it up later. It's really interesting, though. It's cool stuff.
Yeah, it's late in the day, and we're a little tired at the moment recording this little podcast. But yes, so that's how we came to make our own ghee. And another thing that really affects the ghee we noticed was the sort of the protein content and how you cook it. Because if you torch it or cook it really fast, like a lot of people sometimes do that, and if you burn the bottom of the pan, that could leave a very dark and brutal, I call it brutal aroma to the ghee. And I don't like that. It really doesn't blend in with the pastry-like feel that the energy pods have. And we tried that with a few ghees and sort of like making it to the brown butter, hot or scorched.
Yeah,
the scorched
it was
ghee.
the scorched ghee.
The scorched ghee. And we did the quick heating method, and that turned out to be very dominant and really strong. And this is the explanation behind the energy pods, as well as people ask us, how do you got it to this point where you can't have ghee as the most dominant smelling thing there? Because there's that little sweet spot. There's that tiny little sweet spot. You need to hit that right there. If you go a little low, then you lose that butteriness. Yeah. If you go a little high, you get that really strong ghee aroma. And that's why a lot of people get afraid of the ghee inside the product, because they have tasted ghee, but it's overdone and it tastes really bad. So that was the challenge when it came to making these pods, is to balancing out all the aromas. And then came vanilla. And I remember we initially started off with vanilla powder, and that had cornstarch in it. Yeah. And another thing is there was barely any vanilla in there, and the base was just terrible. I mean, cornstarch is not ketogenic. So we went ahead and we got the OG, man.
Oh, it's so good. So we found a company that does vanilla bean grounds. Man, that like just changed everything, because when you have grounds, it's just the entire bean in granular form. And you get full flavor of the vanilla there. You're not losing any money whatsoever. And also, you're just ditching the fillers. And one term that I've coined so far in my keto journey is watch out for those low-carb, high-filler snacks. Man. And we don't want those.
And yes, so this is my gripe with a lot of protein bars that call themselves protein bars. And you might say, okay, 20 grams of protein in there or 30 grams of protein in there, but that's the catch right there. The problem is some of these bars are literally, half of them are sweeteners. And that's my gripe with the whole drive towards this low-calorie movement. You're taking the calories out, but you're throwing in way too many fillers. Now, there's a tolerance point for a lot of these fillers that they throw in there. By the way, if there's something that says prebiotic fiber in there, that's a sweetener most likely. And if it says sugar alcohol, that's also a sweetener. So there's various different names for these sweeteners that are in your nutrition bars or supplements, and you might think that they're not there or it's just fiber. And as we found out with the carnivorous side of the carnivorous community about the whole fiber being totally absolutely rubbish and practically useless in terms of that, we've like, okay, we don't really need to add prebiotic fiber. It's just extra dead weight, and we want to just focus on energy efficiency and good palatability without making the food super hyper palatable. So yes, most of the nutrition bars or health bars, you have to look at the label. If you see you can see on the background, sometimes even the protein bars have combined higher carbs than proteins. There's some bars that have way too much fat than protein. That's not protein bars.
No, you can't say that.
Yeah. So, and then I think let's go back to your narrative with Ketogeek. Did we stop somewhere?
We stopped. I think right after we introduced me getting into ghee and bringing that on board, and we talked about making ghee.
Yeah. So what happened? How has your journey changed when you started Ketogeek to all the way till here? What's happened new?
Gosh, I was gonna ask this question to you actually. I feel like almost every aspect of everything that I believe in and how I feel has changed 180. It's honestly turned me into an extremely skeptical person. Question everything, and all around, everything has improved, really. The way I think, the way I approach, everything I look at, the way I talk to folks, it just feels like I put on a new set of glasses, and I'm now seeing the world through that.
Yeah.
More or less, yeah.
Well, if you want me to answer that, I can answer that question too now.
Yeah,
So my journey since I last rambled on episode 0 of Ketogeek has changed quite a bit. And I think a lot of this goes to Professor Tim Noakes' philosophy of chasing paradoxes, and then going into this rabbit hole of the carnivorous diet and understanding that a lot of what we've been told is absolute garbage. You don't need a lot of things to survive on a ketogenic diet. But you know what I have come to understand as well at the same time? That humans live in the realm of wants more than needs. Because needs are already fulfilled a lot of the times. If you want to be healthy, the solution to that is really cheap, which is $2.99 a pound ground beef at your local grocery store, which is easy mode. But you see, people don't spend that little amount of money on food. They spend a lot more than that.
They certainly do.
They spend more money on cars. Like, you don't need a car technically at all. You could take the bus transportation, or you could drive a Toyota Corolla. You don't need an Audi or a Ferrari. But why do people do that? It's that desire, it's that want that goes all the way into our sort of this hierarchical brain and societal structure where it's an expression of, I made it in life and I'm awesome, so I can afford this. That's why I think people go a lot to Whole Foods as well to shop there, because a lot of that has to play into the fact that, okay, yeah, the ingredients might be better, or at least they're told that way. But a lot of it has to do with, I want the best, and it's a bit of a status upgrade as well when you go shop in certain places like those. So it's just these hierarchical structures that we've built that have created these wants within us, and that just goes into our whole reproductory evolutionary infrastructure, which is, hey, I want to find the best made. I can show them my latest car or how I look and so forth. So this whole sort of, and then this is where I stand as well, is I've moved away from just looking at food and nutrition and ketogenic diet. I've started to view society as a whole and human beings as interactive organisms working with that society in some sort of a symbiotic relationship where you grow as a human being in several different domains. And I think none of these biomarkers, such as insulin or leptin, none of that is going to change if humans are not going to change. So we've started to take a step backwards as a food company and as an information-based company to start to view humanity in a very different light. And a lot of the books that nowadays I recommend are not nutrition books. They're books on becoming a better human being, having idealistic goals in life, but at the same time being grounded in reality to execute those goals. Because if you're not grounded in reality, you might live in far-fetched Narnia, and you might not make things happen. So this is where I stand as far as Ketogeek is concerned. And from this point onward, most of you people will notice that our podcasts are going to span out into other topics as well, outside of just food and nutrition, because at this point, I think we've beaten the horse to death as far as some of the science of nutrition is concerned, and we want to hunt new mountains, figure out new narratives, go to places we've never gone before. Sounded like Star Trek, didn't it?
Little bit.
Yeah. So that's where we are at the moment. Do you have anything to add here, Corey?
Not at the moment, no. Let's move on.
There's a little bit of homework that we need to do here with Ketogeek, and so one of the things that's going to be affected is our podcast. So we're moving all the video content to our website and YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, we're going to start posting snippets and important sound bites from our podcast, so people who don't have a lot of time can just go to YouTube and get quick access to information. And the same thing we're going to do is post sound bites on our Instagram from some of the key elements that we learned from the podcast on there as well. But if you want to go listen to the entire shebang, that will be exclusively on the Ketogeek website with the whole video stuff. It will be we'll be using Vimeo sort of like as the backbone behind that for those people who are more into the technical side of it. The podcast itself on iTunes and Libsyn and on any of your podcast app, it's still going to remain full and the way it has been, so nothing's going to change over there. And by the way, if you are listening to our podcast and have shared this journey with us throughout this entire time, first of all, give yourself a pat on the back and just congratulations to making it all the way through here. And secondly, please, if you go to iTunes and leave us a tiny little review there, that would mean a lot to us. We put in a lot of effort and sometimes go out of our way. It's a bit of a challenge when you're starting to build an information-based product business that really doesn't exist anywhere. So taking all the latest scientific research and talking to a lot of these top-class educators, and we're pretty picky, by the way, and then turning that into a product. And so, but it's been great because people have helped us grow in this business. This back-and-forth discussion and dialogues that we've had, especially with when we do our regular Instagram live streams, that has been so educational for us. In fact, if you see the tiny little decadent buttercream that is our featurette name of the product, like what's it called?
It's called a common name.
So the common name for our product, which is decadent buttercream, was nicknamed by you guys who showed up at live stream, Instagram live stream at Ketogeek. So this is just a beautiful thing, just watching it happen, and some of these great educators, and I have to name drop, man. I have to say, all these people that have been on our podcast, like the Dave Feldman, Cholesterol Code folks, Siobhan Huggins, Ivor Cummins, Professor Tim Noakes, Amy Berger, Luis, and Tyler from Keto Gains, Danny Moravega recently. So all of these people, man, these are stellar educators, and please go support them. And then, of course, like Keto Connect is pretty awesome. Some of these people that have a strong Instagram presence, they have been backing us, and they have been, I think Keto Connect recently came up with their book as well. So all of these writers or influencers have some sort of a book, like Ryan Lowry and Dr. Jacob Wilson have their Ketogenic Bible, which is also a fantastic reference. So please check all of these people out who've been on our show, and just enjoy this ride. If you guys have any feedback for us, we're always happy to take those our way. And so now let's talk about what's going on right now with Keto Geek. So what is something that you would like to share that you're thinking of or doing right now at Keto Geek?
So if you guys have been listening, we've been kind of hyping up a new flavor coming end of May, beginning of June, around there. We first initially started off with the idea of salted chocolate, and we wanted to model it after our coffee protein macros, since it's such a really great pod. Personally, I really like the coffee protein. It tastes amazing to me. I've always liked bitter things. For some, it's not, but it tastes much better as a beverage. So we wanted to continue the beverage line of things. And when we were prototyping our salted chocolate, it just felt like something was missing, and the flavors weren't tying together quite well. So we decided to go, you know what? Let's throw some coffee in there. Coffee's always good. So salted mocha is what we're going to bring to you guys next at Keto Geek. We're going to model it again after the coffee protein pod. So you're going to have a powerful punch of protein in there, and the sustaining energy of MCT oil and ghee as your fats. And it's also going to taste really, really good on its own or as a beverage.
And let's explain to people the origins of how the coffee protein pod came into being. So we had Dr. Sean, but that monster, man.
He is a monster. He ruined everything.
Ruined everything. What's wrong with you, Baker? Dr. Baker? Okay, so he shows up to the podcast, and we're like, okay, let's talk about the science of the ketogenic or carnivorous diet. And we got Amber O'Hearn on there. Then the next question was, what about the sustainability aspect of it? By the way, there's a really fantastic podcast that's soon going to be coming about silvopastures. I'm really excited about that. It's a farming practice that utilizes trees or highland areas which are not accessible by monocropping, and combines that with ruminant or animal agriculture and create this carbon capturing ecosystem, which has the highest amount of carbon capture, by the way, based at least on the references that they posted. So I have to still check that in detail. And it has a regenerative farming. It's a regenerative farming practice, meaning that if your soil has been destroyed or nutrient devoid, you can have those silvopastures and really make the best out of them and regenerate those farmlands. And it's great for people that also want to get some nuts out there, like myself, and you can plant walnut trees or hazelnut trees. Or if you want to go for timber, you can get some wood out of there as well using those trees. So it's a very fascinating conversation, and I think that will have to play a really important role in the future of agriculture, ruminants or animal agriculture and forest agriculture combining together. That's unique. That's really kick-ass. So by going back to our original point, which was that we wanted to talk about the sustainability, and we had Dr. Peter Ballerstedt on our podcast, and he talked about something called protein deficiency, and I think Amber O'Hearn also slightly mentioned that there's a bit of a protein malnourishment going on in our country, in fact, all over the world, to be honest, and so we wanted to play our part as a food company and take the information, the enhanced data that Dr. Peter had acquired, and use that to create a product. So we create a high protein sort of product. And then we had Dr. Ted Naiman. He didn't come up to our show at that point, but we were still following him at this point in our journey, and he was posting about protein leverage hypothesis. Now that got me really interesting that, okay, maybe satiety could be dictated by protein. And so this was a fun experiment to take something that's really palatable or consumed by, not really palatable, but consumed by the public, which is coffee. Combine that with some high protein foods. And since there's a lot of deficiency of protein in women, that's what the data suggested, by the way. So we targeted that way towards the more female audience, and that's been working. A lot of the people that are purchasing our coffee protein pods are females. So and some of them are guys who are using it as a pre-workout or post-workout recovery shake. So that works out really well. So it's really going out great. And this salted chocolate is like the cherry on top, and adds more to it. So we are working in very strategic ways to help this world become a better place. And another challenge with that one was that everybody was talking about sweeteners. At that time, we didn't have that many studies on sweeteners, so we reduced erythritol and practically killed it in that one. So some people were like, okay, we don't want to consume erythritol, so we removed erythritol, and we turned that coffee protein energy pod into a hybrid pod, which can be consumed as a protein latte frothed in hot water, and it can be consumed as is. But that's something I personally can't do, but you, sir, you can do it, right?
I'm a monster.
So yes, that's the story behind the coffee protein pod and the salted chocolate pod. So everything that we learn from all of these educators that have showed up, we take the knowledge and apply it in practical ways, and we're doing what we can to make this world a better place. And so I think last time I went to Paleomedicina in Hungary as well, and I learned quite a lot about their science as well. And this goes again into the life of chasing paradoxes. And Amber O'Hearn, we had that podcast, and she talks about, and I asked her this one question. I said, is there any person or any group of physicians on the face of the earth that is taking an all-meat diet and pitching it against cancer, the very thing that is supposed to be caused by cancer? And she drops that name, Paleomedicina. And I do some research and I figure, okay, these are the only people that are doing this crazy thing of taking meat and putting it against colorectal cancer. Wait, hang on. You're supposed to have colorectal cancer,
right? Yeah,
using meat.
I'm still waiting on it.
I'm waiting on all these conditions. But you know what's really fascinating? Everything seems to get better on a meat diet. In fact, a lot of these autoimmune conditions, they start reversing. That's the case studies they brought. And when I went to the Paleomedicina open house in April, that was a fantastic experience because they're pitching a practically all meat diet against these big, crazy diseases, and they're providing case results, positive case results. Some of them are late stage cancers. So this throws a monkey wrench into the whole thing, which is really fascinating. And now I'm at this point where I'm beginning to sense that, hey, I'm not exactly fully going to be on board with 100% carnivore diet, but what I will say is that it's a great starting point to build the diet on, and then you can add things to the diet and see how you feel. And I follow the Amber school of thought, Amber O'Hearn school of thought, where the dose makes the poison sort of thing. I don't know, Amber, if that's what you said, but...
Poisons in the dose.
Yeah, poisons in the dose sort of style. So I fall into that camp where I think that we can tolerate quite a bit of different foods, but if you consume too much of something, it could have detrimental effects. And so, but the reality is everything's out there to kill you, or is going to kill you in some way. We all have to die.
Well, think of it this way. We're on a floating space rock, and the only thing that is protecting us is an electromagnetic field in an atmosphere from being scorched to death by solar rays.
We don't
Isn't
really...
that kind of crazy?
By the way, we really don't know how gravity works that well.
I know.
So it's kind of...
We don't understand anything.
Yeah. I mean, they did discover the Higgs boson particle, something about that. But it's a work in progress. Hey, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'm calling you out. Do some work, man. Bill Nye, Neil deGrasse Tyson. So that was really fascinating hallmarks or points where we had to really pause for a few seconds and try to understand. And in fact, they've inspired us to work on something more savory and carnivorous, which is very unique. And we're still working on that sort of product. We'll get some more updates as Low Carb USA comes closer, and we might drop a product then. That would be really cool. Or we'll see what happens. But right now, the salted mocha is taken up. And speaking of salted mocha, all of our infrastructures have gone up. We're moving away from the simple kitchen setting that we had to a more industrial setup now, which is a big milestone for us at Ketogeek too.
Yeah, so it seems that the common denominator between all these diets that people go on is that it's an elimination protocol. You're trying to de-diversify your food choices and intake.
Yeah, and I call it, I call nutrition as the least amount of carbon bombing you do to your body till you die. So that's where I stand with the nutrition as far as the meaning of nutrition is concerned.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really good point to understand that the most common denominator in all human civilizations has been meat consumption that has existed through the dawn of time. And it just seems that in those last 50, 60 years that it has become the most dangerous thing, worse than freaking plutonium on Earth. And it just, if you start looking at it from that perspective, then demonizing meat is the most idiotic thing someone can do. Now, there could be certain processes that affect how meat turns out or makes it carcinogenic or whatever that is, but blaming meat is just not a smart idea. I mean, you can blame the processing of it, you can blame the chemical additives on it, but don't pick on meat, man.
It's been around for too long. And
millions of years.
You've said for a year now to my face, you can't beat biology.
You can't. Yeah, you can't win against biology. You can't win against evolution. You have to play with the cards that you've been dealt with, and that's all you can do. And so I think, but at the same time, I think that veganism should not be totally ignored.
No.
I think that the veganism is still a viable option. And I haven't personally delved a lot into it, but I think it can be done in a very healthy way, or maybe in a long-term effective way, but it needs a lot more improvement. And we have Carrie Doulis showing up as pretty much in, I think, at the end of June, and she is going to be vegan ketogenic. So we'll get to learn a lot more about that as well. So I think we've started to move into what our future prospects are with Ketogeek. So that's one important podcast that we're looking forward to as well. And I think at this point, what we've done, especially with the nutty carnivore sort of protocol, is this last year we spent a huge chunk of time learning about food and nutrition, as in learning the evolution and the science and the biochemistry of how things work. And I'm still learning.
Oh, yeah.
But now we've started to focus more on actual practical ways to create foods or utilize food to make them anti-obesogenic in their nature. And there are several strategies that I'm really curious about. One of them, quite like caloric restriction, I'm interested in diversity restriction, which is limiting the types of foods that you have in your daily routine. And I had this wonderful conversation recently, even on our Instagram live streams, and I'm having this conversation more and more. And it pertains a little to the nutty carnivore sort of protocol, which is, okay, what if you just go on a diet that has a little bit of nuts in there, and just a boatload of meat in there? What would happen then? Because you're eliminating a lot of different foods. And I'm going to bring this again. It's based on something called sensory specific satiety, but we call it the Twinkie effect, just to annoy everybody in the low carb and the high carb, because they think it's the worst food on earth. So we're going to use the Twinkie effect. So what the Twinkie effect is, you can eat unlimited amount of Twinkies. Well, you can't eat unlimited amount of Twinkies. You will eat probably 20 your first day, and then they're going to go down to 12 the next day, or 14, and they're going to keep going down until your body reaches a homeostatic position. In fact, they did a study on mice where they introduced a lot of sweet food to their diet, and guess what happened over the time? So their sweet intake decreased, and they reached a stagnant point where it remained there. So it's not the sweetness that's the problem here. It's what you do with the sweetness. I think that's where the problem lies. And that's where a lot of people start to demonizing sweeteners and sweet foods in general. Sweetness is a propensity that has existed through the dawn of time. as far as we can remember in humanity. So blame the foods that contain these chemicals. Look at the food as a whole. Look at it as a pizza. A pizza is a pizza. And a cake is a cake. Whether it's keto or not keto, that really doesn't matter. And then you also have to look into the sensory-specific satiety, and you can leverage that to your advantage. So if you eat maybe, let's say, 5 or 10 different kinds of foods. In fact, that's a common phenomena when you go out and have this Christmas dinner and you stuff yourself full. For the next week, you don't want to eat anything related to Christmas, right?
No way. You eat lots of turkey on Thanksgiving, and then you still have like 50-pound bird left over, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to eat turkey for the next 3 weeks of my life. No. You just don't want that.
Yeah, so these are some of the cues that we're getting here and there. And then there was this interesting study, which was, I started looking into sensory nutrient-driven satiety, and there was this one really paradoxical study I found. Now, this is a mouse study, case in point. But I think mouse studies are to some extent good too, because they remove all the confounders and lifestyle elements that humans are accustomed to. So they took a bunch of mice, and so they were pregnant, female pregnant mice, and they stuffed half of them with an extra amount of multivitamins. So they gave them more nutrients than they deserved. So in their offsprings that came out from those mice, the ones that had the higher multivitamins or vitamins, they showed symptoms of metabolic syndrome.
Whoa, interesting.
So that's some interesting monkey wrench into the whole system. So I don't know what the mechanism was, and I don't know what's going on over there, but I think this should give us a little bit of pause. When everybody starts focusing on nutrients, let's see how do these nutrients play into the role and all the mechanism. But there is some truth to nutrient-driven satiety, because a lot of the foods that are high in nutrients are really difficult to overconsume. Think about leafy green vegetables. They have this taste which you can't really overconsume.
Yeah.
So now I'm drawing this, where I'm going with this is, we are looking at insulin and leptin, but have we looked at what's going on in the mouth? That's your first gateway to protecting caloric overload. So that's been our focus. And I think as food companies, we need to start looking into this.
We do.
Because that's something that has changed. In these last 200 years, the food science has improved.
Oh, drastically.
We've combined that with neuroscience, and we've come up with these super duper products, which in the right combination can lead to overconsumption. It's not that one food that's the problem. You cannot consume Twinkie. But what you can do is you can combine Twinkies with chips, with pizza, and now the storm is created. So that's where I think the problem lies. It's this combination of foods that create the perfect storm, and compound that the fact that there are so many social diseases that need to be figured out. For example, people are not moving anymore. People are having broken families. We are having single-parent households. Now, this is a controversial topic, but that leads to a lot of dysfunctional childhood rearing, and parents aren't spending too much time with their children, and that leads them to feeding foods and leading to conditioned behaviors that are unhealthy. So we need to sometimes step back and focus on something a lot bigger, which is, let's create amazing, kick-ass human beings. That is the battle now we're fighting with Ketogeek. We've moved away from ketones, because ketones are the last step. They're the last bottom piece of the puzzle, or the drip line. It's that human reptilian brain, our conditioned behaviors, our drive to compete, a lot of these things. That is where the battle needs to be fought, and we need to work on those, and that drives political and company-wide profits and gains and dynamics. It's a complicated web as I'm projecting here, but you start with the people, and you need to start pointing fingers at yourself, and then we create a better world. I think that's the battle.
I think everybody in the world just needs to take responsibility for every single action that they have ever done in their life, and also don't regret it. Have no regrets. Like, if you have done something bad and have hurt others or whatever in your life, take full responsibility for it and be honest with yourself. Be real and swallow that pill of embarrassment and move along. Like, you're going to get stuck on a repeat mixtape of bad music if you continue that lifestyle. So just clean it up, right?
Yeah. And there's this one interesting Monkey in the Wrench podcast we did, which was totally unrelated to food and nutrition. That was with Gary Wilson, which was the Great Porn Experiment. And my goal with that podcast was to take the results from novelty-seeking human behavior, which exists in food, which exists in porn, which exists on your social media, where you're just moving through stories and clicks and all of these things. You get that hit of dopamine every time you refresh the page to check your those notifications, man. Those are addictive. Yeah, that's one of the biggest sneaky addiction. And then video games do that too. So this is just literally hijacking your reward circuitry. And that's my gripe with the eat less, move more sort of movement. And I think it's created in good intention. And if people listen to it practically, it makes sense. Oh yeah, dummy, eat less calories. You're going to move more, you're going to burn calories, and you're not going to spend time working about food or thinking about food. In theory, that sounds like a great idea, but the problem is everything outside of that message is just a trap. It's telling you to consume more. This society that we live in the United States is a consumer-driven society.
No, it needs infinite growth to keep going.
Exactly. So they're taking your novelty-seeking behavior. In fact, attention spans have gone down. People are spending no more than 1 or 2 minutes to study a certain topic. And this leads to horrendous propulsion of science. I think this was a topic covered by Peter Defty as well. He's one of the brains behind endurance running, and his gripe was the same thing, is people don't want to go to the heart of the studies and everything. And it's somewhat understandable. Hey, you can't go all the way beyond extracts. But I think this... And now I'm going to pull out, what's his name? Rafi from Break Nutrition. He brings out another really beautiful point, which is everything that you find on the first couple of pages of Google are terrible information usually, because they're meant to be found, because they're marketed. So you have to go beyond those pages. Go to the forums, go to Twitter, for example. Twitter is a great place for finding great educators, if you want to find educators. Or you could go to... Instagram is all about marketing. If you're expecting the best information, then your Instagram is not the place to be, by the way. It's a marketing medium right away. So even in our Keto Geek, let's be totally transparent with you. Our strategy as far as marketing is concerned, on Instagram, it's all about... we do information stuff too, more so than practically most of the companies, but we use that as somewhat of a marketing medium. And then for Twitter, it's mostly a connection with the educators and posting good information. You have to pick something that suits your needs. So social media, watch out for that. So do you have anything to add here, Corey?
When you see Instagram, going back to attention spans being killed, one of the root causes of that is immediate gratification.
Oh,
it's pretty crazy. We want things now. We really want things now because we only have so much time on this earth, and time is money. And la da 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 da. So Instagram kind of became the instant, literally Instagram, right? The instant gratification portal. You post really, really cool pictures that catch your eye as you're scrolling quickly through your feed, and it really is survival of the fittest online, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's the
I'm
Shark
pretty
Tank.
sure you've learned quite a bit in the marketing game, haven't you, Fahad?
Yeah, for us, it's been a little different because we are challenging everybody. I don't technically call myself 100% keto anymore, to be honest. This is by the fact that I'm part of Keto Geek. Yeah, and we're doing the Ketogeek podcast. But the truth is we have to branch out and realize that we need to be evolving consistently. At that time, we had nothing better to think about, and we came up with the name Keto Geek, which is by far, just to let you guys know, hint, hint, one of the worst names you can have for a food business, Keto Geek. So, but it is what it is, and there is interestingly, people are still interested in our wholesale accounts, despite knowing that Keto Geek is the name of the food company. Yeah. So that's why the big energy pods is a great idea. And that was one of the things that we want to share with you as well, is the reason we went with energy pods rather than keto pods or keto anything was we wanted to segregate ourselves away from keto. And we started to realize, okay, we need to just be agnostic. Everything is a tool that can be used in different situations. Just like a knife can be used as a sword, or it can be used for cutting butter or putting butter on your... There's no keto-friendly bread, is there?
There is keto bread out there. Keto Connect's got some good stuff.
Yeah, Keto Connect's got some keto bread. Check out that. If you want to put some butter on your keto bread from Keto Connect recipe from their new... I just did like a full plug for them.
Yeah, you did.
Okay. So if you do that with the butter knife, so yeah, knife can be used for good or bad. That's my point. Okay. So, so yes, where was I with this thing?
We got a little derailed.
Yeah,
okay.
my train of thought just went to another platform and just stayed there forever. But yes, so attention spans are going bad. Everything is getting, but there's hope too. You know, I think there's some good educators out there, good people who are leading the charge and challenging dogma and a lot of the bad stuff that is going on in our country. And so I think that we have nailed quite a bit of topics here. Do you have anything else that you want to cover? Besides the fact that we've covered everything.
We've covered it all.
Okay, we've covered it all. I'm going to look at my notes real quick and see if we have anything else. So just to kind of recap everything, we will be moving our Ketogeek podcast to our website using Vimeo. The main video is going to be over there, but we're going to start dropping some snippets on YouTube. But the full experience is going to be on Ketogeek.com. And if you are on iTunes or any of those podcasting auditory apps, by the way, we're on Spotify.
Oh, that was
right
wonderful.
next to Lil Jon and... is that Lil Jon? Is that a singer's name? Eminem?
Yeah, those guys are singers.
Yeah.
Both of them.
So we're with the OGs of Spotify now. And so you can listen to us while you're listening to Lil Wayne.
Oh, man.
Lil Jon.
That sounds like a terrible
idea. Are there any more Littles out there?
There's probably a bunch, but they're probably all posers.
We should call ourselves Little Something.
Little Alchemist.
All right, we're not going to sing a rap song at the end of this podcast, but thank you so much, everybody, for showing up to the podcast. Corey, you've been a great blast, and thank you for sharing your story. And thanks to everybody who's been on our podcast. We've name-dropped the hell out of them. If we've missed out to you, just know that we really love you for what you're doing. That sounded so romantic. But we like you for what you're doing, and thanks for your contributions. And please continue with your research. Some of the things we might not agree with you, or we may have disagreements, but that's the point. That's the beauty of being a human being. You get to challenge each other, butt heads, gladiator style, and you have a wonderful time. And I think that's about it.
Yeah, final closing message for y'all. Build each other up, don't tear each other down.
There you go. I think I don't have a final message. I've talked too much. So thank you so much for joining us on the Keto Geek Podcast. You guys have been amazing. Here's a glass of wine to our first year anniversary at Keto Geek. Corey, to you too.
Cheers.
Cheers. You guys, keep rocking. I guess that was my final message.
Thank you for listening to the show. You can visit us at Ketogeek.com to check out our premium, keto-friendly, and low-carb food products, including our infamous energy pods, made from the best ingredients we could find in the entire country. We also recommend signing up for our newsletter at Ketogeek.com/signup, where you get exclusive discounts, rewards, product announcements, and the latest content we are working on. You also get a 10% discount on your entire order when you sign up. Go to Ketogeek.com/signup to join the low-carb playground.